Now, without any further delay, coming to tonight's session on how the best product managers work with featured documents. Let me give you an introduction to our distinguished and eminent speaker of tonight, Nils, the founder of Delibr, a startup that helps product managers. As a part of product development, Nils interviewed over 300 product managers, product people to understand how they work and collaborate around feature development, what problems they face, and their approaches to solving those problems. Nils is an author of Epic Alignment, How the Best Product Managers Work with Featured Documents. 8 years on board of directors at Storytel, 6 years as a management consultant at McKinsey. He has an MSc in engineering from Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm. A very warm welcome to you, Nils. We are delighted to have you here with us tonight. Handing over the session to you.
Thank you so much. Really happy to get the opportunity to speak with you guys. I will go ahead and share my screen with you. And I have prepared a presentation that we could walk through. Can you all see my screen?
Yes, we can. Neil, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so what I would like to talk about is Epic Alignment, how the best product managers work with featured documents. And briefly about me, like already introduced, I wrote the book Epic Alignment. I also founded Delibr, a startup that helps product managers. I've been eight years on the board of directors at Storytel, 6 years as a consultant at McKinsey, and before that I was engineering. And then, but I would also like to know something about you. And from what I've heard from my friends at the Institute, you have prepared a poll for this. So it's 3 questions that I would like to ask. The first is what roles are you? Please do reply and fill the poll. It's really interesting for me to see, so I know who I'm talking to. Thank you for the reply. It's clear that about more than half of you have the product manager role. Some are a little bit more senior in the role, and then I think designer is the second most common role, and then some of you have another role. So that's very good for me to know. Then I am addressing product managers. And then the second question I would like to ask you is, how long have you been in product management? Some of you have less than a year, but the majority has more than that, and quite a few has 3 or more years. That's very good. Then I know there's a quite a big range of your experience. And then the last question is, what is the size of the company you are with currently? We have everything from bigger companies, more than 1,000. More than 1,000 is 30%. It's the biggest group, but there's also quite a wide spread between 200 to 1,000, 50 to 200, 20 to 50, and also some with smaller. So yeah, big thanks for those replies. Now I know that I'm talking to mostly product managers that have been in product managers mostly for some time, and that there's a wide range in how big the companies that you are working for are. Thanks. So what I would like to talk about today is mainly the presentation will be based on the book that I wrote, Epic Alignment, and I'll go through the main chapters of the book. So it will be in basically six chapters. The first is Meet the Complexities of Product Management, then Drive towards Impact and Base it on Research, then Embrace User Stories as a Shared Language, then Use a Single Source of Truth to create a shared understanding, then Expose micro decisions through questions, and lastly we'll take a look at what it can look like in practice. So the first one, so meet the complexities of product management. So the first question to ask is, what is a product manager? There are a lot of definitions floating around, but one definition from the High Growth Handbook by Agile that I think is good enough is that the PM is responsible for product strategy and vision, product prioritization and problem solving, execution, timelines, resources, and removal of obstacles, and 4, communication and collaboration across the previous 3 points. I think that's a quite good definition, but to understand why the role is so hard, we must dig a little bit deeper. So why the PM job is so hard? So all knowledge workers handle a set of decisions made together with other people in some kind of process. And the complexity of the role comes from the aggregated complexity of these 3 aspects. And if you compare the PM job with other knowledge workers, it stands out as very difficult. So if we look at these 3 balls then, so in terms of decisions, how advanced is the content matter discussed? How many non-obvious decisions need to be made? And how interconnected are the decisions? Here, anyone with experience in product management will recognize that it's quite difficult decisions according to these criteria. And then also, if you look at the people, how many people are going to give input? How much do the perspectives of those who give input vary? And how do the decision power and knowledge match up? Again, quite a tough set for product managers, with different types of people giving input, and also quite a wide difference in knowledge and power, where some people have maybe not so much knowledge, but a lot of power. And lastly, the process. How much time is there for discussions? How far in advance can decisions be made? And to what extent do decisions change? Again, very difficult. The process is quite complicated. I'll look at the next slide. So this is the archetypal PM process. So no PM's process is exactly the same, but as we interviewed these hundreds of PMs, we started to see kind of an archetype of what it looks like emerge. So the journey of a feature, so to speak, goes from ideation, it's an idea in an early stage, it goes into some kind of prioritization work, and then it bounces back and forth to discover a little bit more about what the feature would be, and then it goes back to priority, and then once it's been said, yes, let's do it, then it goes into some kind of refinement phase, where you add more details to it, and then it goes into development, and then on to testing, and then deploy. And then there's a loop back here with iteration and optimization that goes back into the ideation phase, basically. And so you can see here, in this process, there are a lot of different roles involved. They are the ones marked with yellow. And then there's, the PM is in the middle marked with red. But then there are also a lot of different artifacts and methods involved in this. They are the ones that are gray here. So it's very clear that being on top of this whole process with a lot of people involved, a lot of artifacts, a lot of decisions, it's a very, very difficult role that the product managers face. So that's the first, the complexities of product management. Then the next, how to overcome this in 4 chapters now. And the first one is drive towards impact and base it on research. So how the best product managers manage to say no. So PMs face a lot of pressure from stakeholders across the organization to put a lot of things into the roadmap. In the worst case, they feel forced to put more than they can actually deliver into the roadmap. And that only results in bad outcomes and disappointment and stress teams and so forth. But the great PMs, they are the ones who are able to overcome this pressure and say no to the stakeholders and say, these are the things that we're going to work on, and actually say no to the rest. And the way that they do this is by doing 3 things well. The first they do well is they align on business impact, what is business impact to aim for. The second one is they build a good knowledge base through research. And then the third is they use these 2 to actually make priorities for what business impact to go for, and they do this by focusing on customer outcomes. I'll come back to this. First, aligning on business impact. So to do that, you need to think like top management. And there's a good saying that you should always think of yourself as one step above your current pay grade. And for a product manager, that typically it's almost like you're the CEO or the business area manager. And that means you need to figure out what are the core business outcomes that they are looking for. Sometimes that's clear. Then you just need to understand what is really in your head. What are you trying to achieve? And how can I work towards that? Sometimes that's not clear, maybe especially for you guys in smaller organizations. Then, for example, the pirate metrics, the R are a good one. And I would really urge you as product managers in smaller organizations to try to get the good KPI harness up, to know what are we really going for as an organization, so you can link up to that with your work. Because once you have a view on that, what are we trying to achieve as an organization, you can focus on that and then go down and define your own impacts clearly. One way to do this is with OKRs, objectives and key results. That allows you to kind of pick one of the main objectives for your organization and translate it into key results that you yourself will focus on. And that allows you also to come back to the executive stakeholders and say, based on what we have said we're going to do, this is what I'll focus on, and that's why I'll do this. And that allows you to really step into the driving seat and not become a requirements gatherer, but push your own agenda. But that's not enough. You also need to master upward management. So basically, if you drive your own agenda, but people are surprised by what you're saying, you're not going to get your way through it, and you're going to be overridden. So always be one step ahead of any important meeting and pre-wire and make sure you have good stakeholder management. I think the litmus test is, if anybody is surprised by what you're coming in and saying, then you have not mastered upward management. So if you do all this, then you will be successful in aligning on business impact. The next one is that you can't just say this is what we're going to do without research. So you need to build a knowledge base through doing a lot of research. And the first thing to remember is that this knowledge base should be linked to this business impact that you know from before that you will focus on. And then once you know what business impact you're going for, you should try to conduct different types of research. I think two dimensions can split quite well what you need to do. The first, top to bottom, is quantitative versus qualitative. In the quantitative side, I think you should either work with or be a data analyst yourself, and really make sure to have that quantitative perspective. But that's not enough. You also need the qualitative perspective, and then you need to work with user researchers or be a user researcher yourself to get the kind of flavor in it. But that's just one dimension. There's also another dimension, that is this balance between working in a structured way with framework and being curious. If I go with the trap in being too structured, is that some people we talk to, they find themselves just having these nice frameworks, but they tend to just fill the boxes and not really take the next step. So what you should do is you should have some clear frameworks that you work with, but you should also be driven by curiosity. So if you see something in a framework, a box in a framework filled, you should always ask, so what does this mean? How does that work? Why is it like this? For example, how many users does this affect? What would happen if we did something like this? Or why do so many users act like this? And to kind of bridge it out. Okay, so you need to do these different types of research. And then you need to combine all of this research into a knowledge base, so you can always refer back to it when you have these conversations. Okay, cool. Next. The next thing is that you need to prioritize business impact, but you need to focus on customer outcomes. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but let me clarify what it means. So the first thing you need to do is you need to differentiate between output, outcomes, and impact. So output, that's the very concrete stuff that the developers produce. A user story, a small feature, an improvement, or a bug fix, maybe an A/B test. The outcomes, that's the customer outcomes, that's the benefits to the customer. That could be a problem is solved, a behavior is changed, maybe they give you a different app rating. That's great. That means that the customer loves you. or a little bit more at least. And then the next thing is the business impact. And that's the benefit to your own organization. And it can be relevant to not think about them as the same, business impact and customer outcomes. So here it can be improvements in the pirate metrics or some other financial improvements. And maybe I'll just briefly say why they're not the same. So it could be that your organization is super good at working with existing customers, but you need new customers. Then what you need to focus on in terms of business impact has to be more up funnel things, like activating new customers could be the most important thing from a business perspective. If that's the business priority, then it doesn't really help the company if you do things for customers that are already in there, so to speak. So you need to know, where does the business need you to improve the customer outcomes? Okay, so the next one, prioritize business impact. So here you see the same range between output, outcome, and impact, but you also see the roles. And you see that the only role that spans the entire range from business impact via customer outcomes to feature outputs and tasks, that is the product manager. For example, the developer tends to be output focused, and the business the executive stakeholders are all impact focused. So you need to make the bridge, and because you are the only one that has to bridge, you have to focus on the business impact, because if you don't, nobody will carry that bridge all the way over. But you can't only focus on the business impact, because that's not actionable. You can't just say increase revenue. That's not actionable. You need to kind of figure out how to do it. And that's why you need to translate the impact that you're looking for down to outputs. So, for example, a business impact could be to increase some conversion rate. That would be part of the pirate metrics. And then you need to figure that out all the way down through what change you want the user to make, and also what feature you can develop to make the user make that change, so to speak. So you need to work with the whole range, but that's not it. You need to actually focus on the middle part, the customer outcomes. So you need to work with the whole range. You need to make prioritization based on the business impact, but your main effort needs to be with the customer. So once you know what business impact you need to do, you need to really focus on the customer and help them do it. Here you see the Epic. I'm really a fan of the Epic. I think it's a good sized problem scope to work with. It can be, an Epic can be a feature, an experiment, or a bet, but it's smaller than some big initiative, and it's bigger than a single user story. Maybe it's one or a couple of sprints of work. So that's where you need to focus. You need to focus it really thinking about how is this going to improve for the customer. Yes, and then the next thing is how do you do this? How do you make, now that you have this this focus on business impact and you're basing it on research, so you get the go ahead from the executive stakeholders, then you need to be able to talk to everybody. So you need to embrace user stories as a shared language. And so the first thing to think about is to express features as user stories. And there are three things to know about this. So you need to be aware that there are different perspectives. Maybe it's obvious, maybe it's not. So if I overgeneralize, in the upper right corner here, you have this value, usability, feasibility trichotomy. So business stakeholders, they tend to think in terms of what's valuable for the business. How can we get this out? And designers tend to be focused on usability. How is this easy to use? And engineers tend to focus on kind of feasibility. Okay, what database do we need to connect to this, and what are the tasks that we need to do? And you, as a product, need to be in the middle of this and bridge all of this together. And that's really hard to do, but there's almost a magic way to do it, and that's to talk about user stories, because all of these three groups can understand user stories. And when it comes to user stories, you need to find your own pragmatic way. There's some people, they write the full user story format. That can work. Most people we find write a slightly abbreviated format of the user story. The important thing is that you still have the idea of it's going to be a user and it's going to be valuable to the user to do this. As long as you're with that, it's good. That's why the important thing to do is to think user stories and not requirements. Again, move from being this waterfall-like requirements gatherer that hands over requirements from the stakeholders to the developers, and instead think about you are the product managers, you're setting the direction, and you're telling the story with user stories. And by using user stories instead of requirements, you can bring in all the different types of stakeholders together. And a concrete way to do this is to do joint user story mapping sessions. And you can do this by combining user stories into a map. And what you do is, first, you think about typically the epic that you're going to solve for. And then you should only map the steps that you know are going to be relevant for this epic. This is like the journey that the user will go through for this feature, this epic. And in this case, it's kind of maybe you invite somebody, they sign up, they log in, and then maybe they can log out. That's the kind of account handling journey. And then the next thing you do is you fill it up with user stories for each of these steps. And then you try to tell the smallest story that you can tell, but still allows you to get the customer to the desired result. So here is this, I'm sure you've heard it, the outcome versus output. So you need to do as few features as possible, or like as few user stories as possible that still helps the customer get to where they want to go. So maybe they can get to where they want to with just a Google login. Maybe they don't need the Facebook login. Then you can slice it out and do it later. And that's the process of doing this user story mapping, setting up the story steps with the backbone, filling up with the user stories, and then trying to slice them and push them down to later versions and do a small version as possible. And ideally, you should try to involve both the development team and the stakeholders when you have these user story mapping sessions, because then you can really get everybody involved and you can really see the magic of working with user stories. And the thing with user stories is that they are a great way to have this first joint conversation, but a user story is just a promise to have a conversation. There's a 3 C's framework that works really well to explain this, I think. It says that a user story has 3 aspects. The first is the card, and it comes from it was index cards when it was used the first time, but now it's just the name of the user story. It's like a reference point, almost like a pointer. Like this is the story, so we know what we're talking about to identify it. The second C is the conversation, and that's all the communication that the team and the stakeholders and everybody has around this user story. So it can be physical, like words in a meeting or a Zoom call. It can be notes on a whiteboard, it can be in Slack, it can be wherever. So all the conversation that happens, that's the conversation. And then the third C, the confirmation, that is the set of tests that you need to pass for this user story to be considered complete. Typically, it's acceptance criteria or some reference design, but the main thing is that it's there to reduce ambiguity and to make sure that you and the development team know whether it's done or not, so you can agree on it. But then when you have this, so you have the story, but then you need to continue to add details to it, because it's the user story itself is nothing, and the confirmation, if you just hand over the card and the confirmation to a developer, then they don't have any context, and then they will be back to this waterfall situation where they are just going to implement something but don't know why. They should have the context. They should have the conversation that's behind it. And to get there, it's really important for you as a product manager to make sure that you use a single source of truth to create a shared understanding among both team and stakeholders. And here, there are 5 practices that we have seen work really well to create this shared understanding. I'll go through each of them. So the first one is, it's a little bit catchy, but unless you share pizzas, write things down. So Amazon has this great thing they call the 2 pizza team. It means that teams should be able to share 2 big American pizzas. It's like 6 or 8 people. And if it's bigger than that, then they need to split the team. That's because you need to have this collaboration going. Of course, it's really hard to live up to this. But the point is that as soon as you get a bigger team than that, you have trouble capturing the conversation because everybody will not be in the room the whole time. So that means that As soon as you go beyond that point where everybody can sit in the same room the whole time, you need to capture the conversation, because if you don't, you will have this whispering game where something is said in one room, but another person hasn't heard it, and then you have this disconnected conversation. That means that there will be a lot of mistakes being made or information being lost and so forth. To avoid this, you need to write things down. So either you eat pizzas together, or you take all the conversation and the relevant parts from whiteboards and from Slack maybe, and put that in a document. That's the first one. The second one is that you should capture the most of the details in an epic document. So you should, like I said, you should write everything down in one place. And if it's hard to have in that place, you should refer to that place from other places. And the epic is the right level of scope for this document. And you should strive to have a single source of truth that is this document. That means that, for example, if you have this document and then you have, maybe you have a roadmap that you have someplace, then you should avoid having a lot of information in the roadmap that could potentially be redundant with what's in the document. Instead, you should have a thin roadmap, where the roadmap is, it's nice to have a visual representation of what you'll do over time, but to get to any detail behind it, you need to go back to the documents. You should refer back to the document, otherwise you need to update back and forth. Same with designs. There are some great design tools out there, but you need to make sure that you don't duplicate a lot back and forth. And here it's hard to move all the designs away from these design tools. So here it's good to just have clear reference links between the document and the design tools. Likewise, there's tools for implementing that the developers use. For example, Jira is the most common one. Here it's really good to have these clearly divided tickets that go into the sprint planning in Jira. But the problem occurs when you start having a discussion about what it is you're going to develop within those tickets, because then you have a dual source of truth. So what you need to do is you need to just refer back to the document and the relevant part of the document from the Jira tickets to avoid having this double source of truth. And again, the last part, you see several documents and presentations. A lot of people have several documents and presentations for the same epic. And here it goes over to the next one, which basically you should have the same document live across the stages. So you should start with one document and go through all the steps. So create the epic document early on. As soon as you have an idea and you know this is going to be an epic, you should add a document, write whatever problem you're trying to solve with it, and you should continue to write notes in that document over time as you come further in the discovery. And then you should also continue to write the user stories in that document. And then you should really make the user stories your requirements, like we talked about before, to try to use it the user story format and maybe a user story map in the document as well. And then you should continue to add the details in the same document. And you should also have the kind of technical notes that kind of goes deeper down into how to develop a single story. Put that into the same document. Maybe at this point, it means that you as a product manager hand over and kind of share and collaborate with the epic document together with your development team. That's great. That's the way it should be. The single source of truth means that everybody's involved. Okay, the fourth thing, to make this kind of document work over time, it's much easier if you have a template that can anticipate the topics that will come up. So some principles for having a good template. First one, it's epic level. It's a good scope for a document. If it's smaller, it tends not to have all the context. If it's bigger, there's a risk that things go overboard and it becomes too complex for you to handle. Second one, user story focused, to write the user stories in the epic document. An epic, by its very definition, is like a set of user stories. So that's good. And then the document should be used both for discovery and delivery. There should be topics for that in the template. And it should be structured for stakeholder readability. This is something that a lot of people underestimate. I mean, when stakeholders come in and look at this document, if they even do, they are afraid of seeing a lot of details that they don't understand and have to look for things. But if they come in and the very first thing they see is that there's the description of the problem that's trying to solve, overview of the solution or the approach to solve the problem, and then what is the measure of success, how we're going to do it, and maybe some about the rollout plan. They are probably happy at that level and they don't need to read any further. So put the kind of executive stakeholder relevant stuff up top in the document so they can read the first part. But anyway, when you work with this, it tends to grow. So one thing we have seen work really well is to get the structure that you need by using an outliner. So an outliner, for those who don't know, it's a type of word processor where the document is represented as a tree structure of bullets. And in combination with outliner and a template, there are three really big benefits to product managers. So the first is that the product managers, they can add all the details they want without the stakeholders being overwhelmed. So we talked about adding all the details to all the user stories and piling it in and adding the research and adding all the stuff. If you do that to a normal document, a normal feature document, it tends to grow and become really big. And a lot of stakeholders balk at a document that's 20 pages long. But if it's an outliner, you can just collapse that down and the stakeholder can read just what they need to. If you don't do it like this, a lot of PMs resort to making a presentation of the document that they then show the stakeholder. That's a waste of time and it creates double sources of truth and so forth. But this is something you can avoid if you use an outliner. A second benefit is that the stakeholders, they can really come in, and because of the outliner tree structure, they can navigate really fast among the headings of the template. And especially if all the product managers in your product management team, this is for slightly bigger companies with 2 or 3 PMs, this starts to be relevant. If all the PMs have the same template as a starting point, it's much easier for the stakeholders to navigate and know where to find the information they're looking for. And also, the third point is something that's really, really relevant. It's that once you become comfortable with an outliner, you become much more effective at working with and structuring written information. So you can maybe start with this structure, but then add a couple of new bullets and dig down and add more information and then collapse back up. So it allows you to work more effective with a lot of information, and that's something that you really have to do as a product manager. These types of tools came from authors, and they use this to kind of write the script, and also for screenplay writers that also need to handle a lot of written information. So that's kind of the origin of the genre of the tool. Okay, next chapter. Expose micro decisions through questions. What is this, you might ask? Let's check. PMs, they handle a lot of decisions. So you need to handle these decisions by exposing the underlying questions. So the first thing you need to do is recognize how many micro decisions you actually make. So for example, if you look at the right here, it could be something in a document that says, then OAuth access tokens will be sent. That's an implicit decision in a way. A more explicit way to write it is users will be authorized using OAuth. Okay, then you have made an explicit decision. But before you have this decision, it's not as clear. Like what do you write when you just identify this? So, and also it's not easy to understand the rationale for this. It's just stated. But if you do something like what standard to use for user authorization, OAuth, then you also, as a decision, then you also have the option to add more details below that and why and so forth. And it allows you to kind of highlight questions as they go along. So frame decisions as explicit questions with decisions as answers is a really effective practice. And then this is not a science, but it's an art. So you need to practice this art of asking the right questions. It shouldn't be 100 or 50 questions in a document. It should maybe be shooting from the hip. There's no right answer to it, but maybe 10, 20 questions is more reasonable for a recently sized epic. But this is something you need to feel yourself ahead. Okay, but once you have these questions, then your role then becomes to facilitate structured discussions for these difficult decisions. I don't know if you know about the 6 thinking hats. It's a framework that I really like and I've seen be really effective, both for product managers, but also in my background as a management consultant. We use this all the time. It's so good. I won't go into the details. I just say it's really good framework, good for you to look into, to be able to kind of come in and facilitate these decisions based on the questions that you have identified, and make sure that you get everybody involved and make the right decision. Okay, the next thing then, how to capture this. So the thing you need to do is you need to make this decision-making process transparent within the document. We have seen a couple of different ways to try to do this. The first is some really meticulous PMs, they have like a separate spreadsheet with all the questions and the decisions written down. That's good in that it's very, very clear what the questions and decisions are, but the problem is that you need to switch context back and forth all the time, and it creates multiple sources of truth, because if you write something in a document, then this spreadsheet is potentially obsolete, and the other way around. Okay, then the other solution is to have a separate section with questions that's closer to context, but it's still the other side of the document, so to speak. And if it's a document of 10 pages, then you're still in trouble, because you need to scroll back and forth, and you may have internal inconsistencies. And the third option is to just kind of highlight or comment within the text. That is, in terms of context, perfect level, because it's high precision, but you're missing out the whole benefit of posing questions explicitly. So the thing that we have seen work the best is to write explicit questions within the document. And here you could just see an example. So you ask a question, you add some options, maybe there's even some pros and cons, then you kind of get the feeling of what was this decision, what are the pros and cons, what were the options that we were looking at. It also allows you to make the team come together and agree better, and it allows you to kind of come back to decisions much more effectively. If something is like, should we really do it like this? Well, why did we say to do it in the first place? Yes. So this is exposing micro decisions through questions. If you do this, you'll be on top of the decision process in a much better way as a PM. Okay, now we've rushed through the 4 kind of practices that can help PMs stay on top better by using feature documents. Now we'll briefly look at what it can look like in practice. So first, just about this example document, some caveat. I've seen a lot of different takes on writing feature documents work really well. So I'm not going to say this is what a good epic document should look like, but so many people asked, well, what could it look like? So take it for what it is. This is just an example, but a lot depends on kind of what is the company you're in, and what feature is it, and that can make a lot of things change in how the feature document should ideally look like. And then just briefly about this document. So this is a document. To make it as relatable as possible, I tried to pick one of the epics I've seen most times. I don't know how many times I've seen teams add the ability for users to sign up with Google. So that's the example that we're looking at. Maybe you have done it and then you recognize the thinking. Maybe you're about to do it. Maybe you get some clarity from that. So this is basically a mix of a lot of documents that I've seen do more or less the same thing. Okay, jumping in. So this is the example document, the first part of it. So you see in the beginning, we have this single sign-on is the epic name here. That's an epic that's related to it. And you have the problem stated very clearly. Now it's collapsed, but we have a bunch of conversion data, some customer feedback. That's the research that was added behind this. Then there's some rough idea about what solution are we going to do, and then also a measure of success for what metric are we going for and how we're going to convert it. Then you go into the rollout plans collapsed here, but then we go into the user story mapping, and then you see that there was user story mapping done, and then we go into user stories. And for each of the user stories, you see that there's like a V1, that's the first slice of this. And here within the user story, there's added acceptance criteria, design, some questions to resolve, maybe some research, some tasks. And that's the same for the other stories, but they are collapsed now. And then you get into some details, maybe some questions to resolve, some design, copy, tech, and QA, security, analytics. And in the analytics, this case was expanded. So kind of what tracking do we need, what analysis to set up, what are the hypotheses to be validated, and maybe there's some meeting notes as well. So kind of just going through what it could look like in a semi-expanded, semi-collapsed state. And then looking back, so how did this document then, how can we see the approaches that we talked about within this document? So the first one was this drive towards impact and base it on research. And here you see this question is really stated from a point of view of what is the business metric that is not performing and why is that happening for the user. Measure of success links back to this. And here we also have a very clear plan when it comes to analytics for how to follow up and make sure that we reach the business goal we want to. Second, embrace user stories as a shared language. And here, I mean, I went through it, but you have a user story map, you have some user stories in here, and you have the details for each of the user story added below the user story. So it's really the bulk of this document is constituted of user stories with details below each user story. Single source of truth to create a shared understanding. Again, you see this document. It's supposed to contain everything. The research behind it is in here or linked here. You have the user stories. You have the Jira is referenced from here. So there should not be much details in Jira, but there should be a lot of details in the document, but Jira can still be referenced. Yes, so the idea is that all the things that are relevant should be covered from this document. Yes, the designs here as well. There was a design bullet here, but this was collapsed. I guess either there's a design directly in here, or maybe it's a link to InVision or something. And then the last one, expose micro decisions through explicit questions. And here again, you see that every now and then, most of it is collapsed, but you can imagine that there are more questions in the document in total. So whenever there was something that was highlighted, then you needed to kind of put the questions on it and then make a decision. So for example, here, this is a decision that has not been decided. The question is, what should the relative status of the sign-up methods be on the sign-up page? Okay, so this is when they say, oh, should we only show Google to really push them to do Google? Should we promote Google with email as secondary, promote email as Google with secondary, or equally promoted? Yeah, you see, there are different kind of. This was a question probably came from marketing, like where do we want to steer people in this? That's a question that came up. Good to first write out the question and then add the options and pros and cons. So by doing this for all the really tricky questions that you go through, you have you're on top of the process, so to speak. And then you should mark what questions have been decided versus which ones are open. So you know by kind of highlighting that in some way that you know what's been decided and what you still have to come back to. Okay. Yes. Now we looked at one example of an epic document and how that example document reflects the approaches that we talked about. Now I also have to introduce a shameless plug, obviously. So the Delibr, the company that I founded, it's a tool for writing feature document. And the idea is that it makes it much easier to follow these described best practices that we have talked through. It allows you to bundle all the relevant content into one document and collapse it down to the relevant level. Super smooth two-way integration with Jira, so you can really have the source of truth in the document, but still two-way integrate with Jira, so people can see the relevant part of the document in Jira. You can handle the micro decisions in an effective way, and it really helps you to have a single source of truth and work effectively. And also templates, of course. Yes. Then what we covered, so we went through why it's so hard to be a product manager. We talked about how to kind of step out of being a requirements gatherer and push for autonomy by driving towards impact and making sure that you have research behind it, to embrace user stories as a shared language, to really make sure to have a single source of truth so you can use that to create shared understanding, how to expose all these micro decisions that you do by asking questions explicitly. And then we had a brief look at what that could look like in practice. So thanks a lot for giving me this chance to talk. If you like it, please don't hesitate to connect with me on LinkedIn, get the book Epic Alignment, try out Delibr for your next feature document, and also discuss your product management practices with me. So at Delibr, we help many of our customers with free coaching, where we gather up maybe a few product managers and maybe the head of engineering or something, and we'd have a discussion about what are the problems you're facing and how can you get around that in the best way. Sometimes Delibr is relevant, the app Delibr is relevant, and sometimes that's there are other things that we need to cover to figure it out. Yeah. That's that. I don't know. I try to be quick on time. Please hand over to questions now then.
Sure. Yeah. Nils?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. That was a very highly informative and insightful session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We already have questions lined up for you, so let's begin with the Q&A.
Yes.
Just give me a moment for me to look at what the participants have to say. Okay, here we go. Which tool was used to make the example feature document?
That was Delibr. But you can get to most of these practices also without Delibr, but that was Delibr that was used.
Okay, that's great. And the next one is, any suggestions on how to manage multiple Epic documents? For an example, if we need to release 8 different tasks from 4 different Epic documents, do we need to keep another consolidated document as version release report? The pain point is, how do we communicate to all the teams on what are features going out in a release or sprint?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, I don't exactly know. So there are 2 different answers to this, depending on. So you're saying you're doing 8 different tasks from 4 different epics. If those epics are tightly related, so it's a bigger initiative that really covers all those epics, then I think it's good to have a big document that kind of has epics as parts of this. So then your document would be a little bit bigger. Then it's almost like a mega epic where like epics is part of it. And then I think it makes sense to have a single document. But if you're working with 4 really different epics at the same time, then I guess my first kind of advice would be to try to avoid it a little bit and try to focus on 1 epic per time. But if you have to, then I still think it's better to have the different documents, one document per epic, and then communicate basically via the sprint release. Maybe you can create a new document to look at that, or you because you have a quite nice overview already in Jira on what are the stories that go into each sprint. So then I would advise to get that overview using Jira. I don't know if that was a clear answer, but that's my gut feeling for what you're saying.
All right. Another question here. Insightful as the definition goes, how practical this is to go with the practice in Agile world?
How practical so the question is, how is this working together with Agile practices? Is that how
practical is this to practice in the Agile world?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I mean, in a way, I think this is a pragmatic approach. So in the way, like I started saying, or what one point is that the 2 pizza team. In a 2 pizza team, maybe you don't need to write things down. So in a really agile environment, when you manage to have like a really small startup, maybe, or for some reason it's like an innovation lab where you can work completely independently, then I don't think you need to do all the stuff that I talked about. But as soon as you get into the context where you have maybe 2 or 3 or more product managers working kind of adjacent together, and you kind of sharing the stakeholders that come in and look at this, then you need to have this pragmatic merge of having, for sure, a really agile mindset and working with quick iteration and slicing and working with user stories, but still having a rigorous way to write things down. Sometimes I think agile And this is something that Agile, many of the Agile coaches also reiterate. Agile, some people say Agile means you shouldn't write anything down. That's a misunderstanding. Agile means that you shouldn't only focus on writing things down, but also on collaborating together. Yes, maybe that's an answer.
Okay. One of the participants is asking if you can share a generic template on drafting one such document.
Yeah, it was the one in the one that I shared, and there's also one in Delibr. If you sign up, you get a generic template that we prepared. It's basically the same that was in the presentation, and also there's one in the book. So okay. Yes, feel right. Free.
Okay, and the same, yeah, that's what he says. He says, I saw the document, but is it widely used for business, and which is the most common document types?
I saw that it's commonly used for business. Yeah. So businesses that develop products and work with this type of sprints where they have epics and then absolutely yes, this is a very common way of doing things. The most common tool that people use for this is writing similar documents like this in Google Docs, just a similar one. But that's where we have seen that by developing our product, we can make the flow easier for them. But in this case, I think that's a very common type of document. We like to call them feature documents. I think the most common word for this document being used by people right now is PRD. It stands for Product Requirement Document. I don't like the term because it's this product, but it's more of a feature, and it says requirement, which I think harkens back to the waterfall approach. But people don't necessarily. When they say PRD, they mean feature document, and it's something like this. And that's very commonly used. So yes, I would say.
Okay. I think we're running short on time, but let's just take these a couple more questions.
I love it.
How would you recommend to prioritize the customer's requirements? If I'm new in a company and there are more than 200 business customers and more than 300 requirements?
Wow. That's a great question. So what I would do then, I think that goes back to this chapter about focusing on business impact. I think the first step is to think about what is the kind of core KPIs. Try to think, if that's your situation, that's a messy situation. You're stepping into a messy situation. The best thing to do is to step out of it and take one step up. And in a way, temporarily disregarding all of that stuff and just thinking, what would your manager say is the most important KPI to improve? What should you really be working on? And figuring out, like, maybe it's the pirate metrics, the AAARRR, or maybe your company has a different set of metrics. And then figuring out, what does that set of metrics look like? Which are the most important metrics for them to improve? And then you can go in and look at these requirements and see which of the ones that you have drive the most relevant business impact. And that allows you to slice quite a lot. And then you should, for those that are kind of on target for what you should focus on, then you can dig deep down further. That would be my best answer to that.
Okay.
Can I keep going with more questions?
We have a couple more, but let's just make this quick, Nils.
Yeah. Okay.
How do you manage when multi-product managers collaborate on the individual feature documents within their teams?
Yeah, that's also a super good question. My real answer is don't do it. So we see this. I see this so many times, and this is one of the most important things I try to coach the people I talk to, is to try to have product. So every product manager should ideally have a product that is end-to-end linked to the customer value, and then when you do a feature, you as a product manager is entirely responsible for it, and you should have ideally a dedicated set of developers working with you. And if you have that setup, it's much less common that you have this multi-product manager setup, because that's really, really messy. But if you do, I think the best thing to do whenever you have these overlaps, they're unavoidable. Invite them, make sure there's one owner of the epic document, but then invite the other PMs to collaborate and comment in your document.
Okay, great. The last one, what is the best approach to create or map engineering epic to design epic?
Engineering epic tools. Oh, I don't think there are engineering epics or design epics. I think there are the product manager defines what an epic is, and an epic is broken down into user stories. And user stories, they each have a corresponding set of tasks that needs to be completed by design and by engineering. So I think if you get to the point where you have engineering epics and design epics, then you have started to go down a path that isn't ideal, I would say. So the best approach is to not do it. Is to have a product manager being in charge of what is an epic. It would be my response to that.
Okay, great. Now we're done with the questions, and well, there are a lot of comments on how insightful this session has been. So now we come to the best question that has been asked. So you need to now. Okay, now it is, in view of the time constraints, we'll have to end the Q&A here. Thanks for the participation, audience. For any further questions, you can connect with Nils over LinkedIn or the other mediums. Now let's hear of the winner tonight, Nils. We will have to end the Q&A here, unfortunately. There were a couple more questions, but now we need to know for the winner tonight, which was the best question according to you?
I really like the question that Sukrit said about having 8 different tasks from 8 different epics and kind of how to handle that, because I think that the nuance behind the question was really kind of interesting to figure out.
Okay, great. So that is Sukrit. We will, congratulations. We will contact you. Our team will get in touch with you for that. Now, this has been an absolute pleasure to have you with us, Nils. Please accept the certificate of appreciation from the Institute. The QR code on the certificate will take you to a dedicated Hall of Fame created for you with a recording of this session. Please share it with your network. We will be sharing the webinar recording on our YouTube channel as well.
That's fantastic.
Thank you very much, Nils. Appreciate you taking time off for throwing more light on this subject. And I think that was really very informative and very insightful.